Welcome to the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, presented by Cannonball Books, the kids' fiction imprint of Cannon Press.
Met a ghost of a king on the road when I first fell. Fire burning to my knees I fell. Met a ghost of a king on the road.
One would think as an American fantasy novelist that you would see much in common with The Wizard of Oz and Frank L. Baum.
Oh.
But you never talk about him, except to say that that's why you said it where you said it. And so I kind of wanted, I had questions about that. And in fact, so did other people. They said, I was just reading this to my daughter and it was weird. And she thought it was problematic, but I'm just more asking you the clear question.
Problematic?
That's one of those words.
How dare she?
Good thing I didn't mention your name.
I don't know your daughter, but how dare she?
Yeah.
Think it was problematic. Okay, why?
Well,
does anybody unpack that? Why it's problematic?
Yes. Okay. I was considering reading it with my 6-year-old. I know there's the issue with the good witch and the wizard, for that matter. Are wizards inherently evil just as witches are?
The good witch? What are we talking about?
Glenn, what's her name? Glenn, the good witch of the East.
Right.
Yeah. How should a Christian navigate this classic with their kiddos? Lots of magic stuff going on that doesn't seem cut and dry. We've talked about some of this before, but I thought it was a worthwhile investigation. I don't actually know what the problem with the good witch is. Is it just because she's a witch and witches aren't good? I think that's probably the problem.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Nothing to it. The good witch of the West doesn't bother you?
Yeah, I'm not. Let's start by saying I'm not a huge fan of Oz.
Yeah.
And I have not read broadly or recently.
Yeah.
So, but what I can say is that my own they're really acknowledgments in 100 covers. I just want to acknowledge that I'm not the first. Like
to set a fantasy story in the U.S.
Yeah, I'm always a little surprised at the overweening hubris of my breed, as I think you might be as well. I mean, like whenever you talk to an aspiring author, you get a sense of grandiosity, and people who feel like they, like the Blues Brothers, are on a mission from God. And my
favorite is the unpublished ones who have their pen name already picked out in like a very fancy
and they
way.
have their holy war. They have their crusade that they're going to be on and the way they're going to change the world. And they don't start with just the basics. Just get all the way back to, can you make some good food? Can you make something fun for somebody to read? The reason why I did what I did with the Oz allusions in 100 covers is because I didn't want to pretend like I was the first American fantasy novelist. There is plenty of distinctively American fantasy, none more famous than Oz, and set in Kansas. And so part of that is we have in our imaginations, thanks to Oz, the ability to suspend disbelief about Kansas. Anything could happen there. We've already done this. We've already done the tornado picks things up, and we have witches, and we've got this whole thing. And so there's kind of the ice is broken there in Kansas, thanks to Oz. And so I started there in my career. I started with the fantasy. I wanted to like root there initially. Also because it's close in ecosystem to what I've experienced in terms of the Palouse, and I could write it. I can write wheat fields. I can write farmland. I can write those things because I grew up in that. I just need to flatten it. So
no elevation.
Yeah. So it's like, I'm going to change some things, but really it's when you've been there, it's not that different. It's America, and it's, barbecue, baseball, and big red barns. And it's kind of,
yeah,
there's a lot of familiarity for somebody who grew up in the wheat fields of Idaho. There's an ability to write that. And I was not like I was doing a close study of that. So it was enough. I could write it. I knew I could write what I knew. And also I could acknowledge that I'm following in the tradition of people who came before me. It's not the kind of fantasy I want to write.
Yeah. That's what I thought was more of an interesting discussion of what about it strikes so differently from what you write. I mean, it's not very realistic, I guess, in some ways.
No, it's not realistic at all. It's not attempting any kind of realism. It's far more shadow puppetry and tropes and allegories, and it's
from the yellow
sort
brick
of
road being a Pilgrim's Progress sort of thing where you're
it strikes me as somewhere in between Roald Dahl and the Phantom Tollbooth. It's like it's not as direct as the Phantom Tollbooth, but it gets there. It gets to this real direct allegorical thing. And I'm now also, thanks to the movie and everything else, it exists in the imagination in a way that it's bigger than the books. It exists in the fabric of the American imagination.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I did what I did. I wasn't trying to imitate his style. I wasn't trying to imitate his writing. I wasn't trying to do anything like that.
Just the existence of magic.
Yeah. And,
getting sucked off. I mean, that opening scene is fantastic, I guess. The whole idea, the inciting incident of her getting sucked off to a magic land, landing on a witch, and instantly freeing people from there.
Yeah, that's fun.
That is a fun moment.
Yeah, and it's sticky, and you understand why people.
And it's just weird, though, too.
Yeah,
it's almost Lewis Carroll-y levels of.
Yep.
I don't really enjoy it. I don't get why the Scarecrow's this way, or the. Maybe it's just I'm also remembering the creepy Lion Man costume from the movie.
Yeah. No, I it's not my jam.
Yeah.
It never was my jam. It's not my style. It's not to say that it's terrible. It's just not the kind of thing. It's not to my taste.
But you don't have a problem because there's a good witch in it.
No.
Right? And why is that? Just to spell things out for this question.
I do think it's a little bit problematic. It's like if you had a good killer, a good thief, it's like you have to realize that you're cutting contra the grain immediately.
Okay.
So a good witch, you have to be thinking that a witch is not a neutral category. Like you have to realize that there is a contradiction.
So Glenda, the good witch, isn't just a good version of a thing. She's a specific. She needs to be someone who's acting contra to what she's made. Yeah.
So if you state a category, you have to know what its default factory settings are. And is this plumber, farmer, policeman?
Yeah.
Those are neutral categories. They don't go good or bad. It can be the bad cop, the good cop. It's like the bad farmer, the good farmer. They can go either direction.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are some things where there's a default factory setting that's supposed to be one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And which is one of those that's supposed to be bad. This is bad. And so for you to say the good witch is to say the one who's contradicting her own identity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's not impossible, but if you treat it like it's a neutral category, then you're dumb.
Okay. There you go. So maybe you agree. This is problematic.
It can be. And I think it gets handled a lot of different ways. It's not like it's like wildly dangerous to read. A Disney movie can be about a little girl who needs to shake off the shackles of her father. Can be far more dangerous than, a story
than
about
Glenda, the Good Witch of the West.
But you should talk about it.
Yeah.
It's also really easy just to change the word or to shift it around or to unpack what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when I read Terry Pratchett and there are some witches and they behave in ways that are hilarious and also good and bad. I'm not, confused or upset or crossing that book off my list. It's just a muddying of categories that could have been more precise. It's not.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's not a huge deal.
Right.
So, this is one of the big discussions around Harry Potter that people get hung up on, and they're confused when you get into Tolkien. What's the big deal?
Because Tolkien has wizard.
Yeah.
Harry Potter has wizard.
Yeah. Why is it different? why is one more nerve-wracking and the other not? And I think the issues of where magic comes from and by whose authority are you doing this and empowered, really kind of answers the question of whether this is good and would we call it witchcraft or not. So I think it's one of those things that's more ontological. It's more something we would get into the definition of the word. And so if somebody had power like Moses and they did a thing and they did this thing with a magic staff, and using this magic staff and their power, they did this amazing work of magic. What do we call it? A miracle. And we call it a miracle in order to sidestep any confusion. Right.
Okay.
And I think that what we ended up doing is sidestepping our own wonder, like over generations in calling it a miracle.
So we're almost not surprised we put it in a different category.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I push people to think about Moses in the court of Pharaoh as a wizard duel. Like, this is a wizard duel. This is what it is. It's on a literary level. This is a wizard duel. And you have the good wizard and you have the bad wizards, and there's a wizarding duel. And unfortunately, what a lot of people, because they totally, I think, screw up their conception of miracles and that kind of thing, they start to believe that Moses didn't do anything. They think that God did something and Moses didn't even get used. Like, Moses waved his hands and did absolutely nothing, and then God did it, but in a way that tricked the Egyptians into thinking Moses did it.
No, I think a lot of people think that.
I think that's the operating assumption, and that is not what the scriptures lead us to believe in any kind of close reading at all.
Yeah, the word I've tried to use for that's an arbitrary. Moses is what he did is sort of arbitrary to what happened. Like, he sort of happened to be in the proximity of the action.
Yeah.
As opposed to the means of the action.
Yep.
Right? I think it starts to get weird, but I think people need to be uncomfortable in that way. And
it's you have to think about, I really do believe that God is obviously he's obviously the power, but God is the power when I, pick up my coffee mug. It's like when I lift my coffee cup and rattle my little ice cubes and my cold brew in the microphone, like, none of that is just of myself. Like, all of that is ultimately of my Father and of the Creator. Like, all of that is energy and power that's come down from, been given to me by my Father. And
yeah, I remember
when I use the energy in my bicep, like, it's not really, it's been given to me.
Yeah.
It's in my bicep now, but it's even held there as grace from my Father. I can't even keep it there.
Because you'd say, well, yeah, I remember losing an argument as a college kid where I was saying, I think I was arguing for deism, where God basically set up these rules and they function. And my friend Samuel was arguing, no, it's his word right now that's making it all work and function together.
Yeah.
And I lost happily that argument.
Yeah, good.
Have never looked back.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the idea, is not that our synapses and our muscles all clench together when you move your bicep because there's some power that's set aside. But we it's the same, right? God's power and the physical.
I think Moses was given power the way that I have been given power.
His power just
the way I've been given power to walk and think and lift things. Yeah. Moses was given power.
Yeah.
And we know this because he abused it.
Yeah, he went and hit the rock when he wasn't supposed to.
And it worked.
Yeah.
So
you can't, I'm certain you could respond to that and say, well, God just happened. You just get into weird knots.
You tie yourself in knots if
God just happened to make it work so that Moses would think I don't know.
If Moses was doing the wrong stage directions and it was all a farce and it was all a lie.
And God's supposed to make a sound in the microphone when Moses does this.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's all lies. Moses isn't doing anything. He is not the means of anything.
Yeah.
He is the sleight of hand.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And we have a lot of language for that, like the language of means and the language of causation in divine and human interaction is already something we talk about. Prayer can be a means for bringing out a specific physical cause.
Yeah.
We're happy.
And so Elijah races horses, right?
Yeah.
And when he, like, whose legs are moving? It's like, those are his legs.
Because that's when he beats he beats the chariots?
Yeah.
Back to the
And
city.
so when he outruns horses, would be the fastest man to have ever run on the planet. When he outruns the horses, they were his legs moving.
Yeah.
But he was given a strength and given an energy, given an ability that was beyond human norms. Now, what we have is what God gives us normally.
Mhm.
None of us can run without the gift of God. We're all given, like, this is one of the things that makes miracles difficult. We are all miraculously given the ability to run. It's like, and anyone who can run has been miraculously given the ability to run.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And that energy is coming downstream from a star. And we can get all into that and like photosynthesis and the creation of, apples from air by means of a star. And then we shove it in our faces, and that, like, God's created means in transferring energy into muscles, which he's made from nothing. Like, we're all just down here made from nothing. So there's a degree to which everything's miraculous, but we define miracle as that which is out of the ordinary, right? So
Yeah.
the fact that God is constantly bestowing just insane amounts of grace on us all the time, we then just define that as ordinary. And then we look for things that are extraordinary to be miraculous. And so he's not doing anything different in giving ability to a human.
You see that as the same category.
It's like he's giving an ability. He is behaving in a way where he just gave abilities to a human, just like he's given abilities to every human. And it's amazing that we can think, that we can see, that, you've never, and this, you can really melt your face off if you start wandering down these roads, but if you've never seen anything directly, you've only imagined things. Like, light hits your eyeballs, and then your imagination has to get to work.
To make the image.
It all is translated into language in your nerve, and then your mind has to take that language coming through those nerves and then imagine. Like, there's no direct, unmediated experience that we have of the world. Everything is constantly translated, retranslated, imagined.
It even comes into our eyes upside down, right?
Yeah.
It comes in, and then your
Well,
imagination
it hits
goes
the eyes, and then we have to
flip
part
it.
of the translation in the imagination is that you have to flip it. And if you wear glasses that make the world upside down,
your eyes will correct.
Your brain will shift it.
And then you take them off, and everything's
that's crazy. And your brain will shift it back again. So it's, like, we're all here receiving all these things from God all the time, and then God gives a little extra sauce to somebody, then we're like, it's a miracle.
Yeah.
And we find it, and people struggle to believe. People struggle to believe in a miracle, because I struggle to believe that God would do what? That God would give somebody a little extra, caliente than he gave me. Like, why is that hard to believe? It's really, really strange. But anyway, when we get to Moses, Christians, because we don't like using words like wizard, because wizard implies that there's some ability in the person, even if that ability was given by God. Like, even if the ability came directly from God, was a gift of God, even if the power came directly from God, we like to act as if he was a paper doll. And, it's like the paper doll moved its arm, and then God smacked something with a hammer from behind.
Yeah. Okay, but if everything's magic, then nothing's magic, Nate.
That's not how it works.
Isn't it? I guess
no. If you say everything's extraordinary, then nothing's extraordinary. It's like, yeah, sure. But magic, the definition of magic is not that which is extraordinary.
Okay.
So if everything's extraordinary, that's the new ordinary, right? Because you're defining it based on what's normal, what's average. So to say that every snowflake is beautiful does not mean that none are.
Okay.
It's like it doesn't mean that. And so it just doesn't. Now, if we say that everything's a miracle because we've defined miracle as extraordinary, that's where we get into trouble. Magic, we don't get into trouble. This is why I actually like the categories of natural magic and those things a lot.
Natural magic and super.
Yeah, basically talking about the supernatural and natural magic and that kind of thing. But miracles, we tend to assume to be the extraordinary. And I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it does diminish our ability to see the everyday, the amazing miracle of the everyday.
Okay.
Because the word miracle means extraordinary, and this happens every day. This is ordinary. God is this gracious all the time. He is this phenomenally gracious to all of us all the time. And because he's this gracious all the time, I can't call it a miracle because this is the baseline. And we only call things that are above the baseline miraculous. And so turning water into wine slowly cannot be called a miracle. Turning water into wine quickly is a miracle.
Okay.
It's like but turning water into a wine, it's like, well, that's the only way he does it.
So you distinguish that the natural one, I guess. How about ones that don't follow natural patterns? I guess like the staff into a snake or something like that. How do you distinguish that as a?
Okay, so a
natural,
creative act.
Yeah.
Right. That's a true creative act.
Yeah.
But every single thing here is the fruit of a creative act.
Okay, so you're saying it's in that level, it's not weird. It's what God does all the time.
Yeah. What is weirder about a stick being turned into a snake than a rattlesnake giving birth to live young?
Okay.
I mean, that's just bizarre.
It's pretty weird. It's supposed to come out in eggs if it's a snake.
Yeah. What's weirder about
That's
that?
What's normal.
What's weirder about that than watching a flying snake jump out of a treetop and then flatten its entire body by spreading its entire rib cage from head to tail, by suddenly fanning its rib cage out and slithering across the air a couple 100 yards to the next tree.
Yeah.
Then you're like, like, what is that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. I'm like, well, but those are flying snakes. Right. They have the ability to kind of like unhinge their ribs and fan their ribs out. And that's what they do. Like, right. That's nuts. Like,
gotcha.
They do it all the time.
Okay. So I think
they do it all the time. And so the fact that what we get hung up on is when God does a one-off, whenever there's a one-off thing, but it's not actually for his power, having made everything from nothing. It's not like, okay, so this snake was made from a stick. Like it was made from a stick as opposed to from a tiny swimming sperm and an egg. It's like a fertilized egg and then this leather, this leather casing and then the goo inside constituted itself slowly into a little baby serpent that came out eating grasshoppers and then grew slowly after eating lots of locusts and grasshoppers and mice into a full serpent, having melted mice in its gut and turned those mice into bones and venom and scales.
Okay.
That's somehow less impressive than just like God did that. It's wildly tricky. Like,
okay.
So it's one of those things where you look at the way he always does it ordinarily, and because he's doing it on the reg, it's always happening this way. We just overlook the ridiculousness of it, how just amazing it is. And then something happens, it's a one-off, and we say, well, that's a miracle.
Okay.
I get it. But is it really fundamentally, it's different in pattern. It's different in pattern than all the others, but is it different in power? Is it different in ability? It's like, no, it's not.
Okay.
It really isn't. Now, some of the real striking miracles,
Mhm.
The ones that are actually different, like truly different, are when he places authority and power in mankind that is extraordinary, like beyond the norm. So instead of him making a snake from the goo of molten locusts and mice, he he gives a man the power to throw his staff on the ground and turn it into a snake, and the power to touch its tail and pick it up and turn it into a staff.
Mm.
And locating that power, that creative power in a man, that's the extraordinary act. So the extraordinary act is not God turning a stick into a snake and back into a stick. There's nothing extra special about that for God's power, other than the fact that he just did it in a weird sequence in a different way than he normally would. The thing that's actually unique about that whole situation is the location of the power in Moses,
Mhm.
the location of that creative power in him.
And we tend to focus on the product itself or the action itself.
Yeah, we tend to focus on the fact that, hey, a snake got made in a weird way.
Mhm. Yeah,
Like, okay, a snake got made in a weird way.
they're all made in weird
They're
ways.
all made in a weird way. It's all weird. It's all like all of it's weird.
Gotcha. Okay, now I think I'm finally kind of getting how Tolkien was really against the word magic because he thought it meant some sort of sleight of hand or
Yeah.
some sort of manipulation.
Yep.
He liked to save it for the use of the enemy, and the elves didn't have a category for it, even though they seemed to sort of be doing magic,
All the time. Yeah.
right? Capturing
Yep.
the light in a gem,
Yep.
that sort of thing.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Tolkien really lasts and holds up, is because it enables him to focus in on authority and the location of authority and the source of authority, which is what makes magic okay or not. It makes it stolen or given.
Okay.
And so you see the elves operating by gift, by ability, like
Mhm.
birds flying. They're like birds in flight. This is something they've been given the ability to do. It's just baked into their design.
They can make a robe that hides you.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
This is part of their ability.
They call it natural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is in their own fabric. God made them this way. Like he makes a stick bug that way. And so they're operating within their design in doing those things. And they have the authority to do those things. And I think Gandalf has the authority to be doing what he's doing. He's operating based on power, like raw power, not on the technique and the manipulation of having said the correct words in a certain way, if that makes sense. Like the Harry Potter style magic is all about, but did you say it correctly? Did you hold your tongue right? But you got to do it. And there's a little bit of the power, like the power is there because his Patronus is, it's tasty.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he's got a little extra power, obviously, that's latent in him, but then there's all this manipulation and saying the incantations and those kinds of things, which is more about technique and manipulation. I think that's the thing that Tolkien hated.
Okay, because then when he says it is the enemy's magic, it's usually something we would call gunpowder, right? Them at Helm's Deep, them blowing something up.
Yep. It's pharmakeia. It's that kind of like drug mixing, potion mixing.
Yeah.
The A-bomb. It's that kind of thing.
And even the ring, I guess you'd say, is trying to locate tons of power in an object to control other people.
Yep. So it's a way to imprison power. It's to falsely imprison power. But then you see Gandalf, and he's a guardian. He's wielding one. But Gandalf operates with a certain measure of power and strength, right? That he's been given, and then he's promoted. And he's given more. Yeah. And so his strength has gone up.
When he becomes Gandalf,
and he's promoted via having died, having laid himself down in conflict with the Balrog, and then being, brought back. So it's a very interesting. The way Tolkien navigates it is very interesting.
Well, I've always
Frodo can't learn. Frodo cannot learn it. There's no little spells and incantations that Frodo could learn, because that would be like a rat trying to fly.
And that'd be pretty foolish of Frodo to be like, "Hey, show me how to do the firework thing."
Yeah, Gandalf. Can I hold your staff and do this? And it's like, well, you can imagine Tolkien doing that, like having that but having it backfire very badly because that staff is part of his power and authority, and then now you're stealing it, and so there's going to be consequences. And so on. So Tolkien has
similar to when Pippin steals the Palantir.
Yeah.
Tries to grab or control that viewing stone.
It does. He just doesn't have the equipment in order to, wield the storm, to do that kind of thing. So I think that when you get into the nature of magic here, you have to look at how God gives power to people historically, how he does it in his stories and how he does it here.
I'm just thinking of all the everyday miracles you hear, where a mom flips a car over,
So when that's a perfect example, because when a mom flips a car over off of her kid, when a mom grabs a car, you have to say in that moment, it's like, okay, so there's a couple different options here. It's like, and there's two that would be acceptable. One is that she didn't. Right. She grabbed it.
She lied. Something else flipped it.
She grabbed it, and an angel grabbed it at the same time. Right.
Yeah.
Like an unseen force is also there. If you had eyes to see, you would not be deceived.
Gotcha.
It's like there would, like, if you saw it clearly, if you saw it with Elisha's eyes, you would see it as it actually happened. She grabs the car, and a guardian angel grabs the car, and
together they flip
the car off.
And somebody paints a picture of it.
Yeah. And it's like, it's like we only see the part of it. The other that I think is highly likely is just raw grace, just kindness of God, that she's given an ability in that moment, that she's given an ability to do it.
Can I also push back and say what I think people will want to say is, oh no, we just don't know what the human muscle can do when there's like this much amount of adrenaline.
Right. There's some truth to that.
And we just say, so could that be ignorance there? Well, I guess maybe the way we could sort this out is say, we don't know what the normal means of grace is.
So what they could say when they're saying that, they're arguing for the possibility of a new ordinary.
Yeah.
So they're saying it wasn't a miracle. There's actually, this all could be ordinary. Like that could be a new ordinary for everyone.
Gotcha. And you're saying that's kind of dumb because.
Yeah. And now I would say that muscles at all, just realize that muscles at all are incredible.
Yeah. When you start to go down to the tiny little parts that all join together into bigger parts, and then.
It's incredible. It's all incredible.
The fact that muscles only work one way. They only pull. Yeah. None of them push. They only do one thing.
It's ridiculous. It's incredible. Now, I already find all the muscles to be amazing. If somebody says, do you know that they could actually be even more amazing? Collectively, they could get stronger. It's like, well, obviously they will, like in the resurrection and so on. I expect that as we all become more fully human and become what we are truly meant to be in the resurrection, that we'll see what muscles can really do. It's like that we'll get there. So is this a glimpse of that? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take any shine off what just happened.
Okay.
So you find a lot of people who are highly motivated to make something not a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
They want it to be not a miracle.
Yeah, they want to say it's scientific.
This is not a miracle.
There's
it's like,
an
that's
explanation.
it's really dumb. Because everybody's they try to get to a place where the natural world, absent the supernatural, could explain what just happened. And you can't, because the natural world, absent the supernatural, doesn't exist at all. There is no natural world. It doesn't function. It doesn't exist. There's nothing. And so they're highly motivated to say, see, a mom could have done this without help from the supernatural. It's like, no, she couldn't have, because she could never have been a mother. She could never have existed. She would never have walked on this planet apart from the supernatural.
Gotcha.
So even if you say, well, by the grace of God, actually, it turns out muscles, when activated in a particular way, can do these phenomenal things. It's like, well, all that means is in that moment, by grace, she tripped into a new level that nobody had ever seen before.
Yeah.
And that we'll all get to experience someday. So,
but you'd still agree that there are certain categories where, you're just saying that natural doesn't make sense, but you'd agree there's certain categories that
natural as divorced from supernatural.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that distinction. Okay, that helps. I think that's very key for understanding or discovering. Is this problematic magic, or is this magic
Yeah.
that makes sense, or why is Tolkien's different?
Is the magic about incantation, manipulation, the seizure of power? Like, are you stealing power that is not designed for you?
Okay, this is awesome.
That is outside
Can we jump
of your
into your
authority.
books real quick?
Sure.
So the distinction between Henry and Darius
Yeah.
being pretty key right there,
Mhm.
because Henry, he actually gets a new nature, or he's given ability when he sees the dandelion.
Yeah.
Right? It burns into him.
So when he's burned by the dandelion fire,
What's it called? Is it the change? I can't
Yeah.
remember. Yeah. So something changes in him, so he's able to access power in a way that isn't before.
Yeah, he becomes a green man. It's like,
Right.
this is, he's able to pull power from around him and to use that strength.
And then Darius is the bad guy who steals power, right? Can you explain how that works a little more? Well, actually, I guess he has some natural power because he's the mushroom guy.
Yeah. So Darius has the same starting point that Henry has, and then is just not content with it. And so he's fundamentally deceptive and constantly trying to grasp for more, which is why he's allied himself to Hermione, and he's looking to, instead of multiplying life. So one of the things that instead of multiplying life, he's actually looking to kill, drain. And one of the reasons why I represent him with fungus is because his life, his power is the kind of life that means the death of others. So it's like the life he actually is able to produce is the life of decay, the life that comes from that kind of decay. I also have him using his power to modify his own physical appearance.
Yeah.
He's deeply insecure and is always grasping. And so where Henry is unleashing this kind of like green, this very, it's fire, it's like, but it's, when he's done, there's dandelions everywhere. And when Darius is done, there's mushrooms everywhere and everything's rotting and mushrooms are growing in it. So Henry is multiplying life. And Darius can't do that without leaving things dead behind. And that's more symbolic of what he's doing and what the witch does. So when Hermione gathers her strength, she cannot do it without killing, without draining. It's fundamentally parasitic. And so Henry's is more of an alliance as opposed to drainage. So when Henry gathers power, like when he like girds up his loins, gathers power and is going to strike, he's not leaving things dry and shriveled around him. Where Hermione is. So she's draining everything down to ash and dust. And Darius is just short of that, where afterwards it's rot, it's wet rot and decay and fungus.
Yeah. Is Hermione's Black Star sort of a ring sort of stand-in, a similar sort of thing?
Yeah, but it's just it's similar, but it's also the point of it's like an appetite that can never be filled. Ever be filled. So it's like basically a little like a black hole she can hold in her hand, where it's just consuming. So it is that consumption. So she could never be filled because she has this tool that enables her to never be filled. Like she herself could be filled, and she has this, this extra device, this Black Star that she's using to enable her appetite to go way beyond what she would be able to do on her own, enabling her to devour far more.
Okay.
So it's the multiplication of her, of her devouring. But
Gotcha.
and so Henry, it's natural magic. It's by design. He's made this way. He's meant to be this way. It's his inheritance. It is his birthright. And this transition that he experiences when he's burned by the dandelion fire is something that's coming. It's coming for him. It's coming by design. This is who he's born to be, and is called to be. Darius betrayed that he had a similar birthright and could have been faithful with it, and he's abused it instead. And so I think that's one of the things I've learned from Tolkien and from Lewis, is that you have people who have power and magic, and they have it by authority, they have it by inheritance, they have it by gift, by birthright, but they don't have it by theft, manipulation, scheming.
Yeah. We got a little more time. I was thinking jumping into Lewis with that same question, and you're already going there. Jadis, when she's making candy, for example, it's a trick, sort of, I guess.
Yeah.
How do you view Jadis's magic?
So she has real power, right?
Yeah.
And she has real power, which she's abusing. She's sort of, she's one of the jinn, she's a descendant of like fallen angels, functionally. She has this supernatural ability that is not meant to be where it is. She's not meant to be wielding it. Mm-hmm. It is the downstream consequence of this rebellion against heaven. And it is hollow fundamentally. So you're going to eat this candy and it's going to leave you feeling sick and wrong.
Yeah.
It looks good. The first taste might be great, and then you're just going to feel awful.
Yeah. Always winter, never Christmas. Obviously, her main power.
Yep. And so she's got this. But if you go to Charn, like you go back to the power to destroy.
Yep.
Like ultimately, her power is destruction. And
the final word that she said.
And so, this is what we have sought for a long time, is the ability to destroy. And we've gotten pretty good at it. So there's no way that if we explained, to Captain John Smith or Walter Raleigh or, any number of people from a different age, like, no, so actually the world is made up of these very small particles that move very quickly.
So quickly you can never see them.
Yeah. And they're mostly not there, but they're moving very, very rapidly.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all made of. And it's this very complicated dance of them moving at very high speeds, as fast as light. And they're just tiny. So far, they would have no problem.
Mm-hmm.
That would make complete sense to them, that there's spheres spinning,
and
that it's that what's going on up in the heavens is going down on all the way down to the tiny thing. And then even if you got to a place where you said, and there's so much power in these tiny things that if you split one, an entire city will be engulfed in flame, just gone. They still would have no trouble, because their concept of like natural magic and like the way God has infused power in the world and design, none of that would be shocking to them.
These are early alchemists.
Yeah.
I mean, they're looking for that.
Yeah. So it's like, you're gonna tell them like, yeah, no, if we do this, we can erase whole cities.
They'd be like, I was looking for that.
And it's like, so did you figure out how to cure fill in the blank? And we'd be like, no, but we can erase cities.
Mm.
Like we haven't figured that out. We won't cure the plague for another 20 years, but we can erase a city. It's like like destruction always outpaces gardening. we always outpace the actual like tending of the world, and that kind of with the authority of Adam, the actual like fruitful authority of Adam, we always will outpace with the bloodshed side.
Mm.
And I think that there's no way that we could look at that and say that that's not magic.
Okay.
They would look at that and be like, yeah, that's sorcery. Like that's the most powerful sorcery ever. And we'd say, no, but it's repeatable. And they would say, so?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's that kind of manipulation, that kind of finding that kind of power and force through repeatable manipulation is just something we renamed, but they would have another name for it. And they would know exactly what it was. I think I said on the last podcast, we talked about magic, that if we described for them the use of embryonic stem cells, they would understand. It's like, so here's what we did. We took very young infants out of their mother's wombs and we made a paste of their tissue and we inject it into the shoulders and knees and whatever of men to make them strong, they would know that that was necromancy. They would know that's death magic.
You are stealing life from
that's
something.
Death magic. We have a word for it.
Yeah.
And we erase these old words and just have science. It's all just
science.
It's all just science. And we are very, very foolish in our own like sterile protected linguistics.
Yeah.
So it is always interesting to me when people balk at stories that have witchcraft. And it's one of those things because the word I get, like the word, like, yeah, it's there, it's in scripture, but there's also an older understanding that would have included a lot of our pharmaceuticals companies under that category. They would have understood that most of what big pharma does is witchcraft. They would have put a lot of, a lot of weapon design, like a lot of that would have gone under sorcery. Chemical warfare, weapons of mass destruction, all that kind of stuff would have gone under sorcery. A lot of the kind of research. I mean, you look at the Planned Parenthood videos and that kind of stuff. All of that would have gone under witchcraft. It's like, so we have plenty of people who are watching sci-fi and they're watching it with a very, very narrow modern definition of witchcraft. And somebody has to say the word witchcraft and know that a medieval would have seen all of these things as some aspect, some category, some subset of sorcery, necromancy.
Because you're using power to manipulate.
Yep.
And for wicked ends, basically.
Yeah. If you are manipulating the natural world to try to reach beyond your authority, like to get outside your authority, then you are, you're playing around. You're dancing with the devil.
And obviously there's a lot, or you're not saying all technology.
No,
is that,
not at all. But there's obviously lines. So if you look at embryonic stem cell research, you look at what was going on with all the sale of the baby parts. You look at even what people are doing when they are doing tests on animals for shampoos. Like even there's things like that medievals would have looked at and said like, that's wrong, or that is a form of witchcraft, or that's like, there's things that they would have condemned in any number of areas of our lives that we don't even give a thought to.
I mean, it made the news only because of those like hundreds of beagles that they were testing flies on. That's
how many sandflies does it take to kill a beagle or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Like, that's the kind of thing
that barely made the news. I mean, it's like
because Fauci funded part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So even the engineering of a virus, like the engineering of a disease, like this kind of that kind of thing, and so there's obviously lines and there's obviously boundaries that in all these different areas, what we're trying to do with AI, what we're trying to do with creating intelligences and consciousness or false consciousness to make decisions and do those things.
Or the fact we haven't eliminated smallpox, right? We kept it.
Yeah.
Like even that sort of thing seems like a line issue. Like we just kept it for a rainy day. Just keep it in the freezer.
Just in case. But it's all this to say, I'm not saying that science is bad or tech is bad or anything like that. I'm just saying that I get into conversations with a contemporary person who thinks that that only the word witchcraft and the casting of a spell while wearing a black pointy hat is what's being talked about. Mm. And older civilizations would have understood that we are so far across the line in so many areas.
Gotcha.
That we're all over the place.
So to jump back to our opening, when you're talking to a 6-year-old, you need to be more aware of like the question of, are you doing wicked things for your own gain and for manipulation?
Yep.
As a character question than whether the person is a witch or not.
Are you being a faithful son or daughter of Adam?
Yeah.
As opposed to, are you imaging God? Are you imaging Christ? Or as opposed to, is there just a word that's triggers a naughty reflex? And so I think that while we should be cautious around the word, and I wouldn't flippantly use it, I think it has a default factory setting of negative, and we should treat it that way.
I mean, a lot of that's cultural too. We're happy. I mean, it's meant something for so long that when someone says, I just love witches, we all know what to do with that kind of person.
Yeah. But when somebody says, man, it's so cool what they're doing with cloned sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what? what's going on? What Elon Musk wants to do with the relocation of the consciousness. It's like, what do you
Those are
think?
bad things.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I haven't looked into the sheep.
Yeah.
Maybe it's easy.
but okay. So whether or not we have a right to clone sheep is something that could be discussed, right?
Right.
Like you could have that conversation. I'm not saying that we don't necessarily. I'm just saying you should have to have a conversation because that's the kind of thing that your little village wizard would do for you. Come in and like I can just
You have one sheep, I'll make it 3 for the low.
yeah,
price.
like I'm gonna clone your sheep. That's wizardry. It's like you're getting into wizardry.
Interesting.
And so we have all these places where we have scampered way across the line of what previous in previous
we did
eras.
It in a lab, we did it in a university.
Because we did it in a white coat and we made up a new vocabulary for it. We don't understand that those old words would encompass all these different things that we've run down and done, pharmakeia, and so on. So it's, anyway, all this to say is it's more complicated. And in every single one of these areas, it has to be discussed. And we have to talk about whether or not we're acting with the authority God gave us. And if we're abusing the authority God gave us, then we are across the line. And if we're acting within the boundaries of the authority God gave us faithfully, then we are not.
Okay, so do we think Moses is like narrow-mindedly stupid when he says witchcraft is forbidden? Is that our problem? We read back and hear witchcraft is forbidden, right? I don't permit a witch to live. And we think he means the tiniest number of things that you do, like sort of the cauldron.
Very, very, yeah.
Where like if it has a cauldron, that's what Moses is thinking. Rather than something much bigger. I mean,
it's also funny because they would have used a cauldron for any number of things. It's like they're washing with the ash from the sacrifice, and they have their own rituals that they're doing because they've been told to. They're operating within authority, and then somebody else would be doing a different ritual in a different way to a different god, and they would know, okay, false worship and so on.
Okay.
But we know that like witchcraft includes the occult. It includes potion mixing, like pharmakeia. We know there's a significant sexual component
and control of other people, like getting people to do what you want.
Yep. And so it's abuse of authority, and we see that. But then it's also funny that we see that when we get over to Saul and the Witch of Endor, that very, very famous scene, that she really had a little devil she was playing with.
Right.
She had a little imposter devil, and she had a little shtick. What was the familiar spirit getting out of it? We don't know. But whatever that familiar spirit was getting out of it, probably a blood sacrifice. There's probably something other texts in the ancient world would lead us to believe that they
drink blood, right?
Yeah, probably getting blood. There's probably something going on there.
It's very clear in the Odyssey. So
yeah, and then Samuel shows up, and she's pretty upset. Yeah, which is awesome. Incidentally, one of the coolest things about it is that she recognizes him. That there's recognition is pretty fantastic.
I mean, he would have been public enemy number 1 of her, right? Samuel.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He got rid of.
So
you
look at all this, and you think like, okay, so that's witchcraft, and you have to start with the things that are at the top of the eye chart, like the big E at the top of the eye chart, like working with the occult, like working with powers, the fallen powers, devils, and that kind of stuff. But there are other things as well.
Okay.
Potion mixing, all that kind of stuff. And really, it's kind of funny though, because the Sir Walter Raleigh and those guys who were chasing alchemy, they were some of the first people to give it a new name to try to sidestep cultural prejudice.
Yeah. Alchemy, it's an Arabic word.
It's a science.
It's an Arabic
It's a
word.
science. Like I'm trying to turn lead into gold. It's a science. It's not sorcery. It's not witchcraft. Science.
Yeah.
And so it's funny though, we could go back and they would see that we're across the line, but they were the first ones. The reason why we're across the line is because they started, which is also kind of funny.
Okay, good.
All this because if you say the good witch, you have to realize there's a contradiction, but it's the same kind of contradiction as the good thief.
Gotcha.
Good killer, and so on.
It's good. I think it's good to rehab that conversation, the magic one. We're getting there. I finally am, I think, all the way there.
Well, we can do it like in an organized fashion at some point if we want to like work through
principles
methodically, like what is my theory of natural magic and all this kind of stuff. I think maybe we just move on. The most important thing is to realize that miracles are defined as like extraordinary.
Mhm.
And whenever people think that something can be explained by natural means, that is not miraculous. And we just have to realize that the ordinary is really, really ridiculously cool. And so if we're just defining the miracle as extraordinary, that tends to mute the coolness of the ordinary, which is unfortunate. The ordinary is wild.
And that's a lot of your project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of my hobby horse.
Yeehaw.
Yes.
Okay. Aren't they making a movie about Oppenheimer?
Probably.
I think I heard
I
that's
think they're
coming.
making a movie about everybody.
I'm curious if that will get how they handle someone who.
There's a movie about Brian Cole in development right now. There's just movies about everyone.
No.
Too many movies. So many streaming platforms. So many movies.
They just need the content.
The life and times of Brian Cole.
Oh, that'd be so boring.
Peace.
Hi, it's Brian Cole here, wanting to let you know how you can support the Stories Are Soul Food podcast. You can do that by checking out Canon Plus. Head over to mycanonplus.com. Thanks for taking the time to listen to the SASF podcast. We'll hopefully be seeing you at mycanonplus.com.
Make you